Start. Welcome. My name is Renee Forsyth. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Lyme Connect. And just to give you a visual description for those who may not be able to see me, I am a white female with dark brown hair. It's shoulder length. I have glasses on and I'm wearing sort of an orangey blouse. And in my background, we have a Lyme Connect background, which is a light green with our Lyme logo. So we're going to start this session with an acknowledgement of the land on which our Toronto office is located. For those of you who are not familiar, land acknowledgement is an Indigenous tradition and one that many people in Canada and some in the US have adopted in the spirit of reconciliation with the Indigenous people. So I'd like to acknowledge that our session today is coming in part from Toronto, which is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So just taking a moment for those of you who aren't familiar with Lyme Connect to let you know just a little bit about us. We are a not-for-profit organization and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We're focused on attracting, preparing, and connecting high potential professionals and university students, including veterans who have all different types of disabilities, including mental health conditions, into our network. And if you are an individual joining us with any type of disability, I encourage you to join our network. Once you do, you'll be eligible to apply for different scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations, which are our partners, and you can read all about them on our website. In turn, we also work with all of our partners, and I know members of our partner organizations are joining us today, so welcome. And we support you in your recruiting and your onboarding efforts, as well as developing and promoting all of your employees with disabilities. So welcome to all of you. I encourage you to join our network if you're a person with a disability. If you're not, I encourage you to join as a friend of the Lyme Network to keep up to date. But now we want to get to the most important thing that we are all joining here for. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite into the webinar our panel. I will introduce our moderator, and I'm so thrilled to have Michelle Tenzyk joining us. She is the CEO and founder of the East 10th Group, an executive coaching and leadership advisory firm in the New York area. Prior to starting her own company, Michelle was an HR leader for companies such as Primedia, Ascendant, and the Healthcare Consultancy Group. And Michelle also serves on the board of the Stability Network, as well as being a stability leader. And the Stability Network is a mental health organization that we at Lyme Connect have had the great pleasure of working closely with over these last few years. Here's a little fun fact about Michelle. She's an avid runner and is on a quest to complete a race in all 50 states. And she just completed a half marathon over the weekend. So we're thrilled that she could join us. And we're thrilled that all of our panelists will join us. So Michelle, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Renee, thank you so very much. And welcome to everyone who's joining us today for this incredible hour-long discussion. We're really celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month in May. And that means a really big thank you to those of us who shared what mental health means to you in the chat. It was terrific to see what some of your thoughts were. And to me, as I put in the chat, what mental health means to me is living well and wholly, that I can bring my whole self to my whole life. And during the next hour, you're going to experience business leaders live sharing their mental health condition to open the dialogue about mental health and to advocate for better mental health for all. We really hope you leave this hour feeling a sense of strength, hope, and resilience for your own professional journey. And with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists today, Erica Carpinello, who's the Director of Operations, Digital and Media Distribution at Bloomberg Media, Terry Lynn, who's the Product Lead at Dolby Laboratories, and Nancy Salmon, who's a Business Relationship Manager at the Career Advancement Center of Queen's University in Canada. At Lyme, as Renee already said, we believe that sharing our own mental health condition is our collective strength. But these stories can be heavy sometimes, and the discussion may be heavy. We do believe sharing them is what brings us hope and breaks stigma. I do want to mention that some of our discussion may bring up thoughts of suicide. And if anybody wants to tune out for that time, absolutely, please do that for yourself. Or if you need help or resources, the suicide hotline and other NAMI resource groups will be posted in the chat for support. Now, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and they're going to share who they are, their roles, their organizations, and their mental health condition, and where geographically they are. And before I do that, I just want to share my own mental health condition, as I live with clinical depression and anxiety. So with that, Erica, I'm going to start with you.
Alphabetical. my nemesis. Hi, my name is Erica Carfinello. As you heard, I'm the Director of Operations for Digital and Media Distribution at Bloomberg Media. Typically, I am in New York. Today, I'm coming live from Naples, Florida. My diagnosis is bipolar type 2. Which is categorized as having frequent major depressive episodes. And then on the flip side of that, a less intense form of mania called hypomania, which has similar symptoms to mania. So rapid speech, increased energy, insomnia, euphoria. Hypomania is something that's often masks itself as happiness or extreme optimism. So if it's not causing unhealthy behavior, it tends to get unnoticed. And it's one of the reasons why it's tricky to be diagnosed. I've always struggled with depression. I remember being about 9 when I first realized it for myself, and I was put in therapy when I was a preteen, but there was always something not quite right with the diagnosis. So for me, my base mood is always a little bit depressed. I have dysthymia or persistent depressive disorder. I've had countless major depressive episodes and then less frequent hypomanic episodes. And at age 25, which is like the average for people who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I was hospitalized and ultimately diagnosed. That's kind of my story.
Great. Erica, thank you so much. Nancy, how about you?
Thank you, Michelle. So first of all, I'm in Oakville, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. So hello, greetings from Canada, where it's very nice out today. So my story, really, when I look at my career, both personally and professionally, mental wellness and my mental health have been impacted through life events. So my first son, in fact, his birthday is today. He's 22, and back in 1999, after having my son, I was diagnosed with postpartum. The baby blues just turned into something more serious, and my doctor put me on a medicine for depression. And I was managing as best I could with postpartum. In the year 2004, my sister, who was diagnosed with bipolar, had attempted to take her own life a number of times and unfortunately passed away in 2004 at the age of 35. So this sent my depression into what was diagnosed as a clinical depression, melancholic depression. I had to deal with my elderly parents who were dealing with the loss of their child. I also at that time went through a divorce and moved. My job was impacted by the depression. I wasn't sure how to deal with it, and my performance was lagging. And so I, was always a top performer. So hearing that I was not performing to my utmost was a concern. And so I sought professional help, went to see a psychiatrist, adjusted my meds, was starting to get my, back on my feet, and worked as an advocate at the time I was working at TD Bank, and a friend of Lyme, often spoke on panels as well. And so, decided to work with TD on the accommodations, what was required. At the time, there was a lot of support for physical disabilities, but really not a lot of awareness. This is back in 2004 with guidance and support for mental wellness and how to deal with that. So I became an advocate. We started an employee resource group for invisible disabilities, and really through my speaking to different groups, it really helped me to deal with the depression that I was going through. So I became an advocate, and I don't want to say poster person, but I did. In the year 2017, 2018, my job was made redundant at TD, and I had been there for 30 years. My whole identity was Nancy at TD. So going through that transition, I was diagnosed with anxiety. Again, having to work with different medications, different doctors, mindfulness and meditation really helped me go through that transition period as well. So throughout my life, I've experienced different levels of depression and anxiety. And, I'm pleased to be here today so I can share my stories in the hopes of helping others out there that may be going through similar life issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy. And just for our audience, so you know, once Terry introduces himself, which we're all very much looking forward to, we're going to get in a back and forth with the panel and discussion. And really what our aim is to really bring tools, actions, and support for all of you in terms of how these three really terrific professionals have been living and working with their mental health condition. So with that, Terry, welcome.
Hi, everyone. That was a very important disclosure right there, so I needed to pause. My name is Terry Lynn. My pronouns are he, him, his. My disability is a rapid cycling bipolar 2, type 2 disorder, and also narcolepsy. For the basis of this conversation, I'll probably focus more on the bipolar aspect of my identity. I am currently the product lead at Dolby Laboratories for their Dolby.io space. And I think my diagnosis has really come in multiple forms. I think over the years, really with an onset back in 2013, which required a hospitalization for a couple months, I was officially diagnosed with type 2 bipolar. And as Erica has already kind of described the symptoms on that side, I was further diagnosed a few years later with rapid cycling bipolar 2. It typically means that within a 12-month period, you have 4 or more cycles between depression and hypomania. There's a lot of different theories on like how rapid cycling comes, but it is typically the personification in media of when someone shifts between behaviors pretty rapidly. And you basically see like different forms of people. That is typically common in around like 25% of people with bipolar. But yeah. Back to you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. Terry, I'm going to actually start with you if I could. How has what you just described as your mental health condition, how has that really impacted you personally and professionally as the now number of years have gone by? When you reflect and you're looking at it and living with it today, what's the impact for you?
Yeah, I would say that having understood this condition and also having lived through it, I would definitely segment out parts of my life. I think once I really came to terms with understanding like what people dealt with going through this condition, how they reacted to their environment, to the relationships they had, I would definitely say there's been an improvement. But I think prior to that, prior to really digging deep and understanding from just like a neurological component, from a scientific component, how things manifested, I would definitely say that a lot of like relationships, a lot of my perspective was honestly rapid cycling. I had rapid cycling friendships. I had rapid cycling parts of my identity that made it a little bit difficult to like maintain structure and any type of continuity within my life. And I think that kind of extends into my personal space and also my professional space. Both were really constrained to, this is how I plan to live my life for the specific purpose. And there really wasn't necessarily an understanding and parity from people around me in my life. I didn't really have that strong support structure. I think since better understanding what it is and focusing more on advocacy for that basis, I think a lot of things have become a little bit more rooted. and less of a back and forth, I guess, like switch between like how I view bipolar. So, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that's important for the audience to hear, that it does take time to really start to understand what these mental health conditions are that we live with. Erica, I'd love to hear from you on that same question.
Yeah, so I think personally and professionally, it impacted me a lot more when I was younger, and didn't have the tools or the resources to stay healthy, and the words to really express, what I was feeling and what I needed from other people, because I spent a lot of time afraid of what other people would think because of the stigma. And also I was very afraid to ask for help because I didn't want to be a burden on those around me, and having a mood disorder is something that I have to think about every single day for the rest of my life. So once I started asking for help, once I started talking about it, managing my illness became a lot easier.
Interesting. I love that you talked about asking for help, right? And I know from my own story, it took me a long time to get comfortable with asking for help. That was something I really had to learn to do. So if anyone who's listening, if that feels overwhelming, know that we're right there with you. It does take time to learn how to do that. Nancy, I'm going to go to you on this question, which is, when you have disclosed, how did colleagues and employers really respond to you? What was the response once you started to disclose?
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Michelle. When I was able to get up the gumption to be in the state of mind where I was able to disclose, I decided to have a lunch and learn. So go big or go home. So what I decided to do was to meet all of the my colleagues and let them know at the time, back in 2004, about the symptoms of melancholic depression, why I was going through this, why, sometimes I took a longer lunch, or I, when I came into the office, I wasn't really productive until 10 o'clock in the morning. I think that the misconceptions of mental health and my behaviors at work were put down to, oh, Nancy's lazy, she can't get herself into work until 10 o'clock, or she's taken a 2-hour lunch. So when I was able to share that, the reason why I'm not productive until 10 o'clock is the medicine that I've taken really doesn't allow me to function until 10. And still now I don't have any meetings now until 10 o'clock because of that. I think also the opportunity to share that, when I am taking a bit of a longer lunch, it's because I'm going to therapy, that I had to get on a subway to get to the office for my doctor and come back. So I think there was a lot of aha moments and a lot of understanding. So when I did disclose to the team at the time, and as new individuals came on board, I also shared that with the melancholic depression, that some of the triggers that I have and symptoms, for lack of a better word, is that I become very defensive. When I'm very depressed and anxious, I talk fast, as I'm doing now, and I become anxious and defensive. So I think that was able to explain some of the behaviors that I was demonstrating when I did have the peaks and valleys. So my team was very supportive. They understood. Now it's like, oh, now we know. So for me, it was a positive experience in disclosing, because it really allowed my team to understand some of the behaviors I was demonstrating.
Terry, I'm going to go to you, because I know when we were meeting each other prior to today, you really talked quite a bit about disclosure, right? What that process was for you, and even today as a manager, right? Because you manage others. So it's about how you're disclosing your own mental health, which seems to open the door for others perhaps to come forward as well. So I think that's an important discussion for our audience to hear.
Yeah, and what I would say is, I think most people want to help. I think that's an assumption that you can logically take in your workplace. I think the harder bit is really understanding, what can people do to help. I think whenever someone is disclosing to you about their disability, really provide them agency to understand what they can say, how comfortable they can feel saying it. They don't have to be as specific in the moment. A lot of people are generally still processing through like how their mental health really translates towards accommodations, accessibility within the workplace, and they may not have a clear set of guidelines of what they want to follow. I think what you can do is help them by asking about specifics, of like how it would impact their like daily schedule, about meetings, about different work flows. But more importantly, make sure you don't overly push on people and just allow them time and space to come back to you later on after the initial conversation. Usually the initial part of disclosure is relatively uncomfortable, especially if the person has not done it before. Allow them more space and give them time to come back to you, within honestly the rest of the time that they're working about additional things that they realize they may need. It's never just like a one-off conversation you have. It is definitely part of your relationship between a manager and someone that is being managed, or even just a coworker and another coworker. Having the opportunity to just make sure that you're helping to kind of destigmatize is really important. And then the second thing I'll also add to, even if someone has not disclosed to you, I think everyone can still continue to work to contribute better mental health space in general. If you are actively just respecting others, respecting people's time and space, especially if they have time of need, or even if they don't, I think that helps people get to a level of comfort to be able to disclose later on and ask for what they need.
Yeah, I liken that to creating a safe environment, right, where people feel cared about. But there was one more thing I did want you to go to with that answer, Terry, because you brought it up when I first met you. That really so intrigued me, is that you almost proactively disclose yourself with your mental health condition. So maybe talk a little bit about how you do that and why you do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it kind of falls in line with the second point I made. I think disclosing proactively, even before being prompted, I usually do that within my first conversation with my team or with my new manager, or if even my direct reports. It just really sets the tone and kind of sets the structure that, hey, this is something that I do deal with. It's nothing dissimilar from, if I had a physical, less invisible disability, and really sets the cadence that everyone should be comfortable sharing if they feel like they need to. So I've done it at multiple jobs at this point, and realistically, I don't think it has led to any inconvenience or any like stigma at the start. And I think it's just important from my point of view.
That's great. Erica, I want you to get involved in this one, on this disclosure and, how you've handled that in your career, right? And also, I'm interested, and he just said Terry was just sharing with us, he didn't really see any negative impact, like not a good result, but I'm curious if you've had similar experience or how you've gone about this.
Yeah, so truthfully, not at my current company, but I've had colleagues that were friends who have distanced themselves from me once I disclosed to them, which is fair. At that time, I was still sort of in the middle of it. And I have to respect that other people are looking out for their own well-being. Other than that, people have been really nothing but supportive. I usually get people that ask a million questions. A lot of times people will share a personal story. And one time I got like that's cool. And then we moved on. So it was sort of like a interesting, not a point. Let's move on to the next thing. I think that, being vulnerable and opening up about something that's so personal and so difficult allows others to also be open and vulnerable. To Terry's point, it kind of develops this connection between, the two of you. So I would just say like the most helpful thing is just being understanding and empathetic as a colleague or as a manager, and listening goes a really, really long way.
In your experience, Erica, was there anything any one of your employers could have done to be more helpful to you?
I think at the previous job, so I was hospitalized in the middle of like the 4 years that I was at this other company. And I, being the overachiever, went into work and then had to leave work and go to the emergency room. So everybody knew. It was not a secret. And when I came back, I was so embarrassed. Like, oh my gosh, everyone knows, they're all talking about this. And really they weren't. You know, they, you know, everyone was supportive. My boss pulled me into his office and said, you know, my son is bipolar. You should have told me earlier. Here's his artwork. And, you know, we had like a really long conversation. I think that maybe the HR department there could have been a little bit more proactive about my return and kind of easing my return. But I think when I've disclosed at Bloomberg, you know, I've always been met with support and understanding. And do you have the resources you need? Here are a list of resources that we have. Can we, you know, help you in any way, shape, or form? So it's been a bit of both. But recently, I've been at Bloomberg now for 10 years. It's just been very, very supportive.
Awesome, thank you. Nancy, describe the transformation for us that occurred, you know, after you were able to get the help you needed. You know, how did that really transform for you then, personally and professionally?
So when I was diagnosed back in 2004 with melancholic depression and was able to, in my case, have the lunch and learn, talk to my managers and my team about what I needed from a support perspective to be successful, that I think the understanding and the fact that I was able to have some impact on the team as a whole and the bank as a whole, in speaking about my mental health and the transition from having those episodes to getting on a healthy mind, healthy body, as I say, track, is very cathartic for me. So when I have the opportunity to share my stories, you know, I always have the hope that someone is listening and I'm helping someone. Back in, you know, a few years ago in 2018, when I was going through my transition from TD into the life of a retired person before I started at Smith School of Business at Queen's, I think the embracing of working with mindfulness really helped. I think that we're meeting with others and talking with others that were in similar situations was quite helpful. It was a group setting. So I think that the transition in being supported by my current employer, knowing where to go to get the resources. And when COVID hit here in the world, but in Canada, I think that I had good coping mechanisms because of the life experiences that I had in order to deal with the anxiety of really not knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I've heard that in a lot of the conversations that I've had, is that we were on some levels, those of us already living with a mental health condition, right? And we're in a good place in terms of where we are in life. We sort of have a bevy of tools at our disposal, right? That we've learned to incorporate to our day-to-day life. You know, I think we're all very sensitive and aware that this pandemic is creating and has already created an incredible mental health crisis around the globe, you know, in the US and Canada and other areas around our globe that we're going to be dealing with for years and years to come. And that to me is what makes this conversation so critical, right? For those of us, all of us here today who are all in a place where we've gotten the help, we are thriving, we live with our condition, and we can talk about it, will give hope to others, who maybe are first time experiencing a mental health crisis. Terry, I'm curious what you think, you know, if today, if there's a coworker that you think is dealing with any kind of mental health concern, you know, what and how, and that's impacting your interactions, what do you think are a couple ways to best support them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michelle. Truthfully, there's no codified approach to how to deal with a coworker working with it. And even just like the framing of the question, like dealing with it or like working with them, I think it's really just an open conversation that or I wouldn't say open conversation, but just some structure and support that you're providing to someone else that is going through a difficult crisis or difficult episode at the time. I think the best thing to really understand is like how it manifests for every single person is really different and really depends on the day, depends on the environment, depends on what currently they're working through. So honestly, from my opinion here is it really depends on what level of trust you have established at first. If you guys have been open to talking about personal events in their life, not just professional, it would be a little bit easier to like ask about like if there's anything going on or if you can help with anything on their own side. And I think it's important to remember, like, never dig too deeply into something that they may not feel comfortable sharing at times, because as I think Erica and Nancy has brought up, the workplace can be sometimes a heavily, I guess, like anxious environment where you feel like other people think your worth is less or people are talking about you. You want to like help to mitigate a lot of the concerns and anxiety that they may be feeling. So I think just from my approach, typically it's if I have a good level of trust and communication set with them to be able to have certain conversations lightly. Additionally, I think it's just important, once again, that like within your work environment, if you know that there are certain resources that are available, to just routinely send them out proactively, regardless if you know if someone is dealing with something or not, letting people be aware of what company resources there are, maybe on a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, especially given our work from home situation at the time.
I actually love that last thing that you said, right? Just being proactive about ensuring those resources are out there, whether or not someone's come forward or this is a discussion, but it also contributes to what I think you keep, like your theme for today, Terry, is creating a safe environment, making it okay to have these conversations. Erica, anything to add there from your experiences in terms of that interaction with a coworker who, you know, might certainly be challenged with something with their mental health?
Yeah, I think the key would be that you're noticing that it's impacting their you know, working with you, or it's impacting them in some way. If someone has a mental health condition because they've told you, bringing it up a million times isn't helpful in any way. So it's like, you know, if a crisis is happening, if something is happening, and if you feel equipped to offer support and help, and that's really important. Like, you have to feel like you are able to go to them and ask them, you know, how can I support you? Then do that. I would say maybe don't go with like a what's wrong or cheer up, or one time I took this goat yoga class and it cured all my problems. You know, you should try to be supportive. Like, I noticed, you know, some changes in you and I'm worried about you. How can I help you? How can I support you? Do you know the resources we have available here? And if you aren't equipped to have that conversation and there is a crisis happening, then you should go to a HR representative and talk to them about your concerns, because they will be equipped to have that conversation if it's appropriate.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Nancy, I mean, look, let's talk about the realities, right? I mean, all of us here are being open and we're disclosing and we're talking publicly. But, you know, certainly I can talk about my own history where there has been stigma around my sharing my condition. And even Erica, you talked about that in one of your last roles. What have you experienced, Nancy, in terms of stigma, lack of sensitivity, once you're disclosing, once you're starting to share? What did that look like and how could we make that better?
Yeah, and I think with having an invisible disability and people who know me, it's like, you have depression, Nancy? You're one of the most happiest people that I know. So there's the misnomer that you can't be happy when you're depressed. And, you know, it's a struggle. I have to make sure that I look after myself every day, and it is an effort, but I'm, you know, as I age, I have these coping mechanisms. I recall back in the day, we were sitting around a table, a boardroom at my former employer, and the new leader of one of the divisions was talking about goal setting in a retail environment. And we were talking about diversity, and, you know, I hadn't disclosed at that time. No one knew. You can't tell from, it's not, I mean, it's an invisible disability. And she brought up the fact that her understanding was individuals with disabilities would not be able to meet the goals that were made. So they're not going to work at 100%. So if the goal was to make, bring in 5 new customers or sell 5 new visa products, as an example, that there would be an issue if we were hiring and bringing in, mind you, this is a number of years ago, individuals with disabilities, because they wouldn't be able to meet those goals. So I sat there, I listened, and I was angry, but I thought, I'm going to have a conversation with this leader to let them know some of the misnomers that they are sharing, and that, providing awareness and education, I think, was the best comeback that I could have. So, providing the information and guidance that, hiring somebody with a disability is not going to diminish, and it's not going to be a burden on a hiring manager. Let's look at ways that we can support individuals. So, I mean, they had no understanding or clue. And since then, that person is still at that organization, and she has a better understanding. In fact, is a champion, I would say, of mental wellness, and sometimes credits the conversation that we had way back in the day, at not understanding how individuals with invisible disabilities can meet and exceed performance goals.
Right. What's good is I'm starting to see some questions pop up in the chat. So I'm really happy to see that. Just so that you all know, we are going to go to questions in about another 7 or so minutes. So there's a few more things that I want to get through with our panelists and hear from them, from their lived experience. And then we certainly are going to look at those questions and certainly answer as many as we possibly can today with the time that we have. Terry, I want to bring you in here. How has your lived experience, shaped who you are or made you possibly even better at your role today?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Lived experiences are great. I think that one thing to really provide, contextualize too, is it's not necessarily something that you work with and you deal with one time and then you're done. I think the best analogy I can put it to, if you break a leg, you can get surgery on it and that can help you through the more exponential phase of it, but you're still going to feel after effects, right? Maybe less flexibility, less strength. I think with mental health, it's really a sine curve. You're going to have crests, you're going to have troughs, and you're always going to need to make sure you are actively working on it. So I think for my side, my lived experience from a professional standpoint, from a personal standpoint, I think it's really helped me to just understand what is my baseline, what is when I am feeling very comfortable, what is an environment where I feel less comfortable, right? I think because I'm able to move back and forth between different expressions of myself, different ways I process information, it's kind of helping me understand both sides and also the middle ground. And I don't want to be corny, but I think it's similar to Aristotelian ethics, where you really need to understand sadness before you can understand happiness. And I think from just a identity perspective, I think it's just really helped me understand the range of emotions and experiences overall.
Thank you. Eric, I'd love you to weigh in there.
Yeah, I think living with a mental illness has given me my biggest strength, which is my ability to form deep connections and relationships with people through empathy. It's one of the reasons I'm really good and effective at my job. I would also say that it's a great / terrible lesson in gratitude. I'm always grateful for what I have, because I know very well what it's like to feel like you have nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you answered it that way, because that's what I've been thinking about myself is, if I'm being really honest with our audience, sure, I would love to not have a mental health condition. I'm not going to say that, oh, I'm so glad I have it. But now that I do, and again, with treatment and getting better, like you said, Erica, the depth of empathy that I believe now that I've attained for someone else to be in someone else's shoes has just grown exponentially because of my own lived experience. So I certainly try to leverage the fact that I have a lived experience and then use it in the most positive way as I can. we just, for the audience, we just have a couple of more things that I'm going to ask our panelists, and then, feel free to put your questions in the chat. That's how we're going to be able to answer things that are on your mind. Nancy, if people are looking, for advice, looking for support for their loved ones or employees living with a mental health condition, what would you say? What's your advice? What would be your guidance on that?
So I would say, awareness, understanding, research, empathy. If we are, when I look at the work environment that I'm in now, whether it's virtual or in person, recognizing, seeing some of the signs, some of the cues, has really allowed me to speak to those individuals, have a better understanding. I'm really proud of our students at Queen's. Just 2 years ago, we have a ratified student group, Queen's Commerce Mental Health Association, which partners with Lyme. And our students have recognized there's still stigma out there, but I think that through the education, through awareness, communication, that the understanding and empathy is there, and the willingness to listen is there as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I certainly know when I was first diagnosed, I sort of wanted everybody to understand what I was going through. But I would say from my own experience, I was too in the thick of it and too in the throes to be almost objective about what was going on with me, because I was really suffering so deeply. So if I had to do it all over again, I would wait a while on the education of others until, I got the treatment that I needed and I got into a bit of a better place. Erica, anything else you're thinking there on guidance for loved ones or, someone in the workplace who may be suffering?
Yeah, I think, and this is to a previous point I made, if you're noticing something, if someone is having a crisis, one of the worst things you could do is say nothing or doing nothing. The conversation, it's going to be awkward, it's going to be uncomfortable, but don't wait for someone to come to you. Be open, be empathetic, meet people where they are, and just and listen and try to offer resources.
That's great. Yeah, and I know, Terry, earlier you actually started to answer this question earlier on in our discussion, which is, again, some of what I heard from you was, don't push too hard, like don't go too deep, but certainly acknowledge and recognize. I don't know if you wanted to just chime in there.
Yeah. I think that's the gist of it. I think don't go too deeply on it. I think people will share whenever they are comfortable. And also their needs will change, right? Whatever is stated in the initial conversation on what they feel like they need from an accommodation perspective, that could shift, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later as well. And I know that this might tie into some of the questions that people are asking in chat. Like, I think there are certain immediate issues that you can look at helping to alleviate, especially if it's like a specific crisis or episode, but over from like a long-term perspective too. I think there are certain things that you can also factor into like how you support those around you.
That's great. As we round out now the questions for all of you, and then we'll certainly look forward now to taking some questions from our audience, and please keep posting those in the chat, there's people who are listening to us today, as we all know, that are living with a mental health condition and want to, I'm making an assumption, but want to thrive and achieve well in their work environment. A thought or two for that listener today who's listening to us. Nancy.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind is, whether you're a student or you are a professional working in a work environment, is to be aware of what the support avenues are there for you, whether it's your human resources department. Many companies have an outreach third party that you can work with. It's, again, understanding where you can go. Most companies are good at providing those resources during an onboarding and orientation. Hopefully throughout the year, other opportunities are shared as well. for students understanding the counseling and the wellness centers that are available for them as well. So it's, really understanding the support that is there for you, and as an individual deciding what would work best for you, I think are the advice that I would provide.
Great, thank you. Erica.
I would say, you can have a successful career. You can be an effective member of the team. You can have recovery and hope and happiness and a productive life. But you have to put the work in and find the things that work for you. Reach out to support, like Nancy just said, friends, family, employee benefits at your company, government benefits, nonprofits like Lyme Connect. There are so many resources out there that can help you be healthy, and you can't wait until there's a crisis to start looking for them. So really start now and build out your safety net.
That's great. I love that. Start now. Terry.
Yeah, 2 brief points. I'd say one, truthfully, like not everyone's going to get it, as with any other demographic point. I think some people will be more accommodating, some people will be less. I think you yourself becoming comfortable with it is the most important key. I think the second one, I would say statistically, most people have dealt with some type of mental health episode or environment in the past. I think once you are able to kind of like understand that those around you may be supportive, may have experienced it, it's easier to share. So I think
Yeah, and I always say, ask for help, and ask for help in the safe place that you can. So someone who is open to hearing you, whether that be your HR department, whether that be a manager, a colleague, or even someone outside your organization or your community group that you're currently involved in, that can give you some additional guidance besides all the resources that we've already mentioned. So terrific. What a great discussion this morning. We're getting some great reactions from our audience. There's a couple of things that have come through already in the questions. And Terry, I'm going to actually toss this one directly to you because it's very specific. And it's about, how do you deal with day-to-day immediate issues that if you have a mental health condition that you didn't plan for, like all of a sudden you're late on delivery, you can't complete the project that's in front of you. This is the realness that happens to all of us. It's certainly, Erica, you talked about it happening to you. We know that these things happen. What do you do in that moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I read that in chat. I think the first is, the reason why I also disclosed earlier, it kind of sets a precedent for my side to say, hey, there may be certain things that are coming up in the future that potentially may cripple my ability to like cognitively achieve like whatever my goal or task is for that given day, right? So I think having that open and transparent communication with the people I work with enables me to really answer, hey, I need to take like a mental health day. I can't handle this at the moment. And it's usually a little bit more responsive. But obviously that's not always the case. It's not an ideal environment. Sometimes like things need to get done. I think that's when I learned to just like lean on others within my team that can also provide the same function. Like, hey, can you work on this in the short term until I come back? And then that's like an easy transition. I can message that out to people that I'm working with so they're aware of that. I think the second is, if you have not disclosed in the past, and this is really net new for yourself, do you see that as a trigger point where you can try to get more comfortable because of a like forcing function to like let people know around you that this is something that I need to work on for myself and I can't really contribute at the moment in the space? It's a really hard fine line to balance. Sometimes people are comfortable, sometimes people are not, and there usually is stigma associated, which is hard. But I think it's working through and understanding like what you need truthfully kind of trumps like whatever is needed for your organization at that time. Like you yourself and your mental health is very important and is something it's more of a long-term curve, whereas whatever is happening day to day in the workplace may potentially be a little bit less from that perspective.
I love that. Nancy, someone mentioned in the chat, and I'd love you to respond to this, is our own self-stigmatization, where we create the stigma for ourselves, right? Our self-talk is about stigma, living with a mental health condition. How have you combated that? What have you done?
So I really look at it as a silver lining. Through sharing the good days and bad days that I have through panels, through speaking with our students and companies as well, it really has helped me to manage on a day-to-day basis. As I mentioned before, you know, it's cathartic for me. It's something that has helped in speaking about it. So it's almost like a therapy session for me when I do disclose and talk about it. Now it's going to be very different for other people, but for me, that's something that's helped me to adapt. And remember, I'm somebody who was diagnosed with depression back in, well, postpartum and then depression in 2004, and then went through another mental health episode with with anxiety back in 2018. So I think that having to shift and what I needed to look after self-care for myself has been a very good life lesson that I'm able to share with others.
That's great. And then just as a reminder to those of you listening is the Lyme Network on their website has tremendous resources, especially about disclosing, you know, how to do it, whether to do it, and so forth. So I really invite you to look at those resources. Eric, I'm hoping you can take this one on. It's an interesting question around someone really struggling recently with some of their job experiences and feeling as if maybe I need to start my own business or I need to step out of the corporate structure, the organization structure, to actually be more successful. What would we say to this to someone?
Yeah, I mean, go for it. Corporate life is not built for everyone. You know, I know a lot of people, entrepreneurs that have started their own business because now they can make their own hours. You know, if maybe working from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. is something that like you need to do. And, you know, that's not something that is, you know, you're going to find in finance or, you know, technology. So if you feel, I think the important thing here would be like, I think you said somewhere that you can't help but feel like this is a failure or an escape. And, you know, listen, make sure that you're ready for this. It's a leap, right? You know, but it sounds like a good leap, one that you've thought a lot about. And, you know, there can be some fear and some anxiety around change and making that type of leap into being your own boss. But as long as you have the basics, you know, sleep, exercise, nutrition, you're keeping your stress levels down, you're focused on you know, keeping your mental health a priority, and incorporating that into whatever it is you're going to go into, I think you could be really successful.
Yeah, I love that. And that's my own experience. You know, my career was in a variety of senior spots in corporations. And there was a point in time, and this was in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, where I realized running my own business actually was going to be better for my mental health. There was just a lot of flexibility as a business owner that I was able to build into how my company and my team does our work that really allowed me to do what you just said, Erica, which is to put my mental health first. Because if my mental health is suffering, everyone around me suffers. That's just a fact. And whatever it was in terms of the corporate structure, there was a lot of triggers for me. There was intense stress in the way that I take on an organization for me. And so having my own business gives me the ability to set more boundaries that really allow me to thrive and allow me to feel I'm doing my best work today. But it is a leap, I will say that. And so it certainly can come with lots of stress. There's no doubt about that. You know, there's someone, and I'll just end with this, and then we'll just, you know, have a quick wrap up. Of course, Renee asking you to join us in case we missed any questions. But, you know, someone's asking, what if something wasn't working anymore? The employer refuses to address, you know, they're shutting the conversation down. Terry, what do we do? What do we say?
Yeah, it's a really hard conversation, I would say. I think have I strategically looked at all avenues possible? I think here, like, I can't tell if it's necessarily, is it the manager? Is it the employer as a whole? Is it the entire team? I think there's certain avenues that you can take either through HR, either through working within your organization, up to, you know, the executive that's providing guidance to the organization, working with employee resource groups. I think those are all kind of steps I would take. And if that really has been exhausted, it's sometimes like I think you just have to do like a cost benefit analysis on your side. Not all work environments are going to be really beneficial to every single person. So weigh out like how much am I losing out mentally for my mental health state by staying in this job? Because also you have to consider the external impacts of if you are at a bad point from a mental health standpoint, it does impact your relationships outside of work. It does impact your passions that you're doing externally as well. So if all of that is kind of on like a downward trajectory, I think it might be time to evaluate, like, do I need to remove myself from this environment for, you know, a different place that would be a little bit more beneficial to myself.
I love that, Terry. You know, what I just want to add, and then I'll let Erica and Nancy sort of close this out with us, is, you know, first of all, you know, it's just been an honor to be here today, to be with all of you, and, you know, to hear from Erica, Nancy, and Terry, to share so openly. But, you know, we sound pretty good today. We look pretty good today because we're living, you know, we're living well, and it seems like each of us is having a good day today. But the truth of it is a very windy path living with a mental health condition. You know, none of us, this was not a day for each of us to tell our full stories. We wanted to have this panel discussion, but I know from knowing these, if we told our full stories, there is tremendous heaviness with that. There's tremendous challenges with it. There's difficulties with it. This is a windy path. But what we hope you're taking away is you then can have good days like we are, that you can then get to the place where you're thriving and you're feeling productive in your day. So for all the windiness of my own story, I'm here today to tell you I've made it to the other side, and we'd love for you to put your shoulders down to know you're not alone. Erica, Nancy, any last word, and then Renee's going to take over.
You know, I would just say I'm still trying to figure it out piece by piece, 13 years after my diagnosis. You know, I build out your mental health toolkit, develop really strong support networks, and you'll be able to spend time and energy on the things that you love, which is something that I wouldn't have access to if I didn't put the time and the energy and the effort into making sure that when things got bad, I had those resources in my back pocket, and I had those people, you know, on speed dial and in my phone that I could call and talk to immediately. You know,
Right. Nancy, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would just add support network that you can reach out to, I think is really, really helpful. Whether they're in your workspace or community or friends or family, just know who you can go to when you do have those winding paths and need the help.
And you're with us today, so you're not alone. Renee, thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. I don't know if I think these chats are just to the panelists, but somebody expressed deepest gratitude. And I think those are incredible words for all that each of you has shared and brought to this panel discussion. It's been really impactful and powerful. And I thank each of you for sharing your story and joining us today. And for all of you who are joining us, I encourage you to continue this dialogue, to keep talking about it, keep creating those safe spaces so that others feel comfortable talking about their own experiences and asking for what they need to be healthy and productive in work and in life. So really powerful afternoon. Thank you, each of you, for joining us. This recording will be shared. We will be sharing out, we put some resources in the chat, but we will be following up with some additional links and resources in an email. And we will share this recording on our website. So I think we will leave it at that. And thank you, each of you, for joining us, and wishing you a very good day.